now we're going to talk about the limiter. The next step is the limiter, and we are going to find it in our must-have list. Okay, this is not a nice-to-have list, this is a must-have list. So the limiter, you need to have it, but you can apply it at any time. Although it's mentioned as number 5, you can apply it even in the very beginning. Fine, it's your choice, but it is usual that it's the last thing that you do. The very absolute last thing that you do is the limiter. Although you may think sometimes that normalizing this, if you happen to need to do it, can be the last thing to do, but the limiter can be applied at any time. Now, the main two questions, actually 3, so the first one is going to be, what is a limiter? Limiter is simply, you're going to cut all the signal beyond a certain level of dB. So in terms of volume, if you want to think in plain English, in terms of volume, it should not go beyond a certain level. And the second question is, what is that level? Okay, the answer for that, I am going to give you a universal answer. But I'm expecting you, when you have a project for a specific television or a specific distribution channel, that you look at your technical delivery requirements. And this is the name of the document. It's called Technical Delivery Requirements. So you have a list of a lot of things that you need to comply with, whether for video or for sound. One of the things is it's going to mention a minus number dB. Okay, it needs to be at minus something dB. This minus something dB, this is your limiter number. That's what you apply in the limiter. So when you get something, audio needs to be AAC minus 6 dB, and that's the number. And the universal number I want to give you, should you not know what you should use, is always minus 6. Is always to be minus 6. Now, I'm not talking about music here. We're talking about Fairlight for filmmaking. So filmmaking is one thing. Just like for sound, when it comes to music versus film, when it comes to the kilohertz, you are going to do, for music, 44,100. That's for music. But for film, you do not work with 44,100. You work with 48 kilohertz. Okay? So 44,1 kilohertz for music and 48 kilohertz for film. So when it comes to the limiter, for music, it's a completely different story. It's around minus 3. I'm not very familiar with the music stuff, but I think it's minus 3. You could even go to 0, but I think it's minus 3. The limiter as not reaching 0, that's what I mean. But for film, it's minus 6, and it is always minus 6. You could have, you just need to comply with your technical delivery requirements. And I think that for most television stations everywhere in the world, it's going to be minus 6. So your safest route is minus 6, but you always need to look at your technical delivery requirements. Now, this is answering the second question of, okay, what's the number? Good. Now, the number is minus 6. Now, where do we apply it? Let me first show you something. Actually, because I have said, okay, we've got the green screen again. Because I have said that the limiter needs to be applied all the time, I need at least to show you the reason of existence, why it exists in the first place. Because let me show you this example here. I have here a scene where I have 2 actresses that are going to do what? This actress is going, she brings down the handles of the bed. These are metallic handles. They are quite loud. And I have taken the sound from the camera to demonstrate the limiter. I'm not using the sound from the good sound. I'm using the bad sound to show you what kind of problem the limiter comes to solve. So when I play this, you see that it reaches here 0. And this is really, really bad. Okay? You never want to reach 0. But here in this case, I'm using the camera sound just to demonstrate the point. So the limiter comes to solve a problem, but it's not something that you apply only when you notice you are clipping, okay? You don't use it on a need-to-use basis. You always must have it. Like, whether you feel comfortable, no, I'm not reaching even minus 6 or minus 5. We don't care whether you think you have reached it or not. It's basically simple. You apply the limiter. Because, for a simple reason, this is your safety net for yourself. Even if you know, having applied your compression, having applied your normalization. Say, for example, you do your normalization. If you feel the need to do normalization, you do your normalization, then you come back later and you do some sort of a compression on a specific segment which is, I wouldn't even recommend that, because normalization should be the absolute last thing you want to think of in terms of list. The limiter you can apply anytime. Okay, it's the last thing to use, but normalization can come after that, no problem. Normalizing is in terms of sequence, but because we're going to place this one in a certain place and this one in another place, we're going to be okay all the time. So if you come back later and tweak things and change things, you may end up with more than what you have initially planned, and you don't know you have, because sound is cumulative. So what I'm saying is, you may end up being careful yourself and say, I'm going to be doing everything around -6, -5, and I'll monitor that with my eyes. Now, you don't monitor stuff with your eyes. You can look at it just to make sure you get a good feel. But when it comes to the final delivery, the limiter must be there. Okay? Now, where do we apply the limiter? Now that we know the number, now that we know the reason for existence, what it does, it cuts the signal, where do we apply it? It belongs in a track. Well, definitely in a track. We know that because in here it says dynamic. So we can come here and we see the limiter and we click on that and you work. But then hold on a moment. Before we apply this, which track? Because for your project, we're talking about the final delivery. So do you think it makes sense, having worked on a full project, and it could be a feature film of 1 hour and a half, almost 2 hours, which has many actors that have speaking roles, and each one of these actors is going to have his own track. This is the best practice. One actor, one track, period. Okay? So, and you've got like 16 actors and speaking roles. So that is 16 tracks only for dialogue. We're not even talking about Foley. We're not even talking about the ambient sound, and then adding music if you happen to use music for some scenes. Then it ends up being a lot of tracks, and then you lose. Actually, are you going to be applying a limit at each track? No, you don't do that. You go way at the end. You go to the end, to the master. Look at this. So this is by default, not by default, so because when I imported this clip, it's got the maximum of 8 here, but you can add as many as you want. You can add track, okay? You need to apply it at the master level. So M1, you go here. So let me just reset this stuff here and close and come back here and to the master level. And then I come and apply the limiter at the master level. All right. So yes, you're going to have your gate and compressor open activated in the tracks, but the limiter, you always have it deactivated in the tracks and activated in the final master track. That's where you catch the wrong signal. Any signal beyond that may have escaped your attention. Okay, when you're working with so many tracks and so many scenes and so many people shouting sometimes, and you've got a car crash and you've got a few things going on, you want to let the dramatic depth of the story reveal itself through sound, because sound is emotion, but at the same time, we don't go off board. So your limiter is the last man standing. It needs to be at the last gate, and the last gate is going to be your master track. So here we come here to the master track, and we open it, and we see threshold, and I have just mentioned the number, and you look at the default value here, and you think, hold on a moment, Blackmagic has written -21 for the as a default value. Should I take that maybe? So you have -30 to 0. Now, 0 makes absolutely perfect sense. -30 makes way less sense. And -21 is probably the weirdest default value I've ever come across. You should never, ever, ever contemplate, even it should not even cross your mind that you would limit at -21. I do not understand why Blackmagic made this huge mistake of setting this default value at such a level, because your dialogue is going to be at -12. So setting a limiter at -21 is out of the question. -21, your music is going to be playing anywhere between -24, -20, sometimes -18. If you really are, you can bring it higher up, but it is going to be, the limit is going to be -6 all the time, most of the time. So you can't, I mean, this is the wrong part of the decimals, definitely. So you always are going to be way higher here. -6. Okay, -6 is for television stations around the world. You could go for -3 for music or whatever, but it's never, ever, ever going to be -21. This is one of the most unacceptable default values we could think of. So -21 is completely out of the question. Sometimes, and this is why you need to pay close attention when you open some effects and you look at the default values. You may think, well, these are professional people, they know what they are doing. Well, we hope they do, but in this particular instance, you see that this makes perfect sense. The attack and the release, now we have talked about the attack and release a few times. When we talked about the gate noise, when we talked about compressor, we should be familiar now with attack and release. How fast does the effect work, and how fast does it stop working, kind of. So attack and release. So this is how fast does the limiter come into action when we reach this level, and how fast closing the gate. It closes the gate for everything here. So, and how fast does it reopen again. So in here, we have 0.71 milliseconds. It makes absolutely perfect sense. It's brilliant, because you need to have very, very fast attack time when it comes to going beyond the limit that television set in TV or festival, or for theatrical release cinema, or for they have set technical delivery requirements. You need to be fast into applying that. So less than 1 millisecond or 1 millisecond is brilliant. But -21, this is from a different galaxy. I mean, we can't even think of this. This is completely out of the question. This is out of proportion. This doesn't even belong in the world of limiters. So I need you to be aware of these things. So default values for Blackmagic most of the time do not make sense. Most of the time. I mean, some of them do. Like the threshold starting point for -35 is kind of okayish, although you would want to be between -50 and -40. Okay, kind of. You should stay away from your real signal. If your sounds are about, I don't know, like you have some sounds at 30, then being at 35 is quite close. It's too close. It's dangerously close. All right. So in here, we are talking about a signal of -6. Okay, so we said we apply it at the master level. We come here and activate it, and you set -6. All right. If you don't know what to do, set -6 all the time, because -6 is the safest one for all delivery, for all technical deliveries around the world. Now, if you have another number communicated to you, that's what you should use. I would recommend you just keep the default value, one of the exceptions for Blackmagic software. Leave this default value for the attack. It's kind of fine. You can move it up to 1 millisecond. It just needs to be quite fast. And for this one, it's fine, although you notice that it's 93, 93, and it was 93 here. So the moment you see a release for gate, release for compressor, release for limiter, these things do different things, and you still see the same default value, it's a copy-paste. Right, it's a copy-paste. But I don't disagree fundamentally with that, for a simple reason that the release doesn't need to be as fast as the attack for the limiter. So it's fine. You can go down to 60, kind of 60 or something like that. Okay, but these are the main parameters. Okay, so for your limiter, just to sum up, it comes here to make sure you don't go beyond a certain level, and you put it at the very end in terms of sequence. Better you do it at the very end, and you put it at the very last track, the master track, and you just make sure you never, ever, ever leave it at the default wrong value of -21. You need to have -6, or actually you need to have it at your technical delivery requirement number, or if you don't know what that is, and if it's your own project, you're not delivering anything to anybody, say this is my own for your own portfolio, for your own showreel, put it at -6. That's the best practice. Okay.